Pakistan's agricultural sector is one of the leading sectors in terms of GDP contribution. It contributes over 19% to the country's gross domestic product and employs almost 40% of the population. However, the farmers are very much at the base of the pyramid. There's a rampant rural poverty, and our workforce tends to operate informally, is subjected to exploitative practices by landed elites. Additionally, our agricultural productivity is one of the lowest in the world. Despite our claims that we are an agrarian economy, there are various gaps. We're faltering at various stages. If we look at the supply chain, we do not have warehouse capacities, there's lack of cold storages, there's lack of transportation, which hinders not just our productivity, but also puts our farmers in a conundrum where they are, at the end of the day, being exploited due to lack of credible infrastructure. And you've written a book on the very same topic. It covers Pakistan's agricultural political economy. It's titled as Development, Poverty, and Power in Pakistan. And here I would like to ask you, what were your findings in the book, and how can we address these issues that I've just laid out, given the fact that agriculture is still the backbone of the country's economy?
It absolutely is. I mean, if you think of labor force absorption, we still have a sizable number of able-bodied people, men and women, working in agriculture. Yes, there is urbanization, but that urbanization is also unsustainable. We have a lot of slum areas. It's not the kind of urbanization that we've seen sort of in the Western world, where the imperialism, colonization aided that process. Of course, it was fueled by raw material and labor. But nonetheless, I mean, there was rampant industrialization. So you had a situation in Western countries, here in the US, where you have a 2 or 3% or less of the population growing more food than the US needs, and which is dumped onto markets in the global South. So we are not in that situation, right? I mean, we've also had various waves of depeasantization over time. And, so I wanted to take a long view in my work, because it was actually coming out of my thesis, which then turned into a book. And I was, interested in looking at this political economy of the agrarian sector, right? And, it comes on the back of already, let's not go into the Mansabdari system. I mean, the Mansabdari system was actually, it was more statist, if you will, the way that the administration had been set up. But when the British came in, and this is like, the laws of diminishing return and these kinds of political theories were coming to the fore, and they thought that, this idea of proprietorship would be, useful to boost yields. And a lot of other people have, of course, done work on this, from the economic historical perspective. Imran Ali's book on agricultural colonialism, and they sort of reified this, peasantry, and the idea was that they're going to come in from, different parts of the Punjab, because they had invested heavily in the canal economies. And when these peasants came in, there were certain conditions that they had to meet in order to get access to that land. And alongside that, we also saw the Ghoda Pal scheme. We saw the dairy farm. So basically military, involvement in agriculture. So, that is something that the post-colonial state, of course, has also, has followed that precedent. And that precedent had, it had political consequences. If you look at the 1857 mutiny, or / War of Independence, it didn't take hold because there was the peasantry in the Punjab did not rise up, because to a certain degree, those in positions of affluence had been placated to a certain degree. So, there are long-term consequences. And of course, the hydrological development that took place with the canal economies and subsequent damming has had, the ecological impacts that it has had. But this is not only, we're not going back a century and a half necessarily. I mean, even if you look at the Green Revolution, right? And these things are complex because you had a situation, this sort of burgeoning population in countries like Pakistan, and this idea, back in the 50s and 60s, when the concept of sort of ecological preservation had not been on anyone's radar. And USAID became a big proponent of basically using high yield variety, of using chemical fertilizer, pesticide, and mechanics like tractors, which then created, and in Pakistan by the 70s, you had the Bhutto government. Yes, it had come in and said like, the land reforms are going to be by family unit rather than individuals, and there was a lot of sort of maneuvering around that to keep large parcels of land intact. But at the same time, when there was subsidization for purchasing tractors, seed was becoming more expensive, you did see the first major wave in Pakistan of depeasantization. So, now you did not need 100 sharecroppers because managing 100 poor people, even in an exploitative way, is a headache, right? I mean, you have to provide them, advice regarding what to grow, or tell them what to grow, share the cost of inputs, and then, have this kind of paternalistic relationship, which can involve having their children or wives working in your house, but then also giving them, a social safety net. I mean, when there's sickness or an emergency. So managing so many people has always been tricky. And that's why over time we have seen not only depeasantization, but we have also seen, an increasing trend towards leasing, right? Like rather than sharecropping. But sharecropping, while it was historically exploitative, it gave an opportunity to farmers to have access to a piece of land, right? Even if they had to give a sizable amount, proportion, depending on how much they had borrowed and how much they had gotten in terms of inputs, they had to give away a large size of their harvest, was still a better arrangement than leasing for poorer farmers, because a poor farmer does not have the cash up front to rent a piece of land, to spend all the agri inputs that are needed on it, and take that risk of a drought or a flood or pest infestation in the crops. So essentially, then you had people who had some economic means taking on leasing, and the rest just fell into either they left the rural areas, or tried to see whatever they could find in cottage industry, whatever else was around, or became daily wage laborers, right? The khet mazdoor. So
and
so that
if I may come here, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I think the middleman, as to simply put in terms, is also where he found his value, because of the fact that harvesting in Pakistan is very seasonal, and there's a very limited time window in which the farmer has the ability to sell what he's reaped. And that time window is exploited due to, like I initially mentioned, lack of infrastructure capabilities that allows, or that would enable that farmer to store and sell at a price which merits a decent wage, a decent rate. And that, linking to the part where you initially started off saying that there's been a lot of urbanization in Pakistan, and that urbanization has got to do a lot with internal migration as well. Population growth, one, and internal migration. And that has been uncontrollable migration, because we did not grow as structural transformation happens when there's a switch from agricultural activities to more industrialization. Industrialization really did not happen at the same rate at the rate urbanization happened, because rural poverty has been growing, still continues to grow.
Yeah. And on this idea of sort of what to do with the crops when they are grown. I mean, of course, there is limited capacity. I mean, for a farmer, it's a risk when they don't have
Mm,
grain silos, etc. They have to sell it soon. But if you look at the Vardana system, like the wheat, subsidy that is justified in the name of food security. I mean, there's all sorts of problems around that. We won't get into
mm,
the, the sugar, which is also quite amusing. Um, However, with wheat, for instance, the idea is that the government is going to provide an assured rate, and farmers will come and sell their grain. Now, when you're a poorer farmer, you don't have the ability to do the smallest things, like to take your grain, from your farm to, several
absolutely.
kilometers
Yeah,
away
yeah,
where the government is doing the procurement. You don't have the capacity to hang on and wait for a government check to be cashed,
mm,
right? And what do you do in the interim, right? I mean, when you have your urgent needs, so often you'll see middlemen come in there also,
mm,
right? So they have been, although
yeah,
the government tries to push the middleman out of the side, but the arti basically,
mm,
right? So they will, because they are the ones who are providing cash during the year to poorer farmers, and they will pick up their grain from the doorstep, bring it, and then sell it for a higher rate to the government at the assured price, and pocket the change, right? So that's the kind of cost of doing business. So you have, so you, even when you have attempts to subsidize, and these are of course not the landless poor, these are not the agri workers, these are not the seasonal workers
mm,
who go and pick cotton and then go and pick, go to Sargodha and pick citrus and keep moving like that, or do the weeding and stuff like that, pre-harvest. So, there's that large chunk of that's the real rural poor. And then you have, situations where there are very small parcels of land, which are also then economically unproductive because of land fragmentation, intergenerational, and now they're struggling with things like climate change. And it seems that there has not been a very concerted effort which can look at all these stresses, these increasingly burdensome stresses, and try and approach this problem from the bottom up, right? So there's been, and the market mechanism has also been quite futile in addressing asymmetrical markets, for instance. So I mean, Akmal Hussain and they've done
mm,
work on how power relations, etc., create these asymmetries. And the example I just gave you about a poor wheat farmer, that is the way in which they are essentially paying more for inputs, because when they purchase from an RP upfront, they're kind of paying an interest. When they go and want to sell, they are not even getting the state determined rate for their wheat, right? So for them, because of their desperations, because of these structural reasons, because of the fact that they don't own often access to capital, it makes, the market mechanism does not treat them fairly. So there are all these issues, but Pakistan has not been able to, come to grips with these
mm.
issues thus far.